Good evening, young friends, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, compatriots, and the Namibia at large. It's 6 o'clock on the 24th day of May 2021. Welcome to the fourth episode of the Sopo Party Youth League Public Engagement. Comrades, compatriots, it was Jackson Kaweya that sang "The winds of change sweeping across the African continent." And he concluded the song by saying, "Viva Africa, viva." Tonight, Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance are ideologies upon which African institutions are founded. However, they do not provide explicit strategies on how to go about building strong African institutions. Therefore, in order to help us understand and in order to help us build an Africa we want, we have Dr. Kaire Boinde, former ambassador to the United States and the European Union. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
We have Comrade Sarah Lee Elago, chairperson of the Pan-African Renaissance. And we also have Ms. Kachana Sibungu, who is a gender coordinator for the Namibian Public Workers Unions, as a panelist tonight. However, she will join us a bit later in the program. And tonight, we shall dissect and deliberate on arts, on culture, and on heritage, which are levers or levers for building the Africa we want. I would like to take this opportunity to give Dr. Kaire Boinde and Comrade Sarah Lee Elago to just briefly introduce themselves before we kick off with the program. Thank you so much. Comrade Doctor.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm proud that I'm associated with this engagement as a former SWAPO Youth League activist. And I recall from my own days the role of the youth and the importance that we on the SWAPO mother body attached to the Youth League. And therefore, I'm happy that I'm able to engage and make a contribution, and look forward to the energy and enthusiasm that the youth always represent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Comrade Sarah Lee.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Of course, I'm Sarah Lee Elago. I'm a young, motivated African leader with 15 years progressive experience, in governance, youth policy, oratory, and African literature. I'm a staunch Pan-Africanist, well-traveled in Africa and beyond. And, I hold qualifications in public management and leadership and project management, and I'm currently an LLB student. So amongst other things, I'm also the chairperson of the Pan-African Renaissance and also the interim president of the African Youth Union. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sarah Lee. As they say, ladies first, allow me to start with you. According to Wikipedia, which is the free encyclopedia for us as, for our generation rather, the African Renaissance is the concept that the African people shall overcome the current challenges confronting the continent and achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal. How is your leadership shaping the foundations of young Africans, especially young Namibians?
I just lost you somewhere in your question. Can you kindly repeat yourself?
How is your leadership shaping the foundations of young Africans, especially young Namibians?
Thank you very much for that question. You know, a lot of people that know me at continental level know that I'm very, very, very passionate about Pan-Africanism. And, you know, a lot of times we want to separate culture, heritage, and, you know, arts from Pan-Africanism. You know, as young Africans all over the world and, you know, in Africa and in the diaspora, we cannot separate this two. And my leadership in particular is responsible for an organization and movement called the Pan-African Renaissance, which we started off as a movement in 2016 and gradually moved into an organization in 2018, where we held our first Pan-African Leadership Summit. We had a vast amount of young African leaders from all over Africa. We had the support. We had our main keynote speaker, comrade former president, the founding father of the Namibian nation, Dr. Sam Nyoma. We have a matron for that summit, who is Her Excellency, Comrade Mildred Yankees. And so my leadership tends to create awareness of Pan-Africanism. I think that a lot of people, a lot of young people do not resonate with Pan-Africanism. They do not know what Pan-Africanism is, or they don't know what Africanism is. So with the Pan-African Renaissance, we are spearheading a new dawn where we are creating constant awareness of Pan-Africanism, and we are educating and inspiring young people all over to understand that we want a self-reliant, self-sustaining Africa, and that can only be achieved through African unity. And African unity, in short, equals to Pan-Africanism. Yeah.
Comrade Sarah Lee. Doctor, the reason why we have you on our platform here tonight is to tap from your wisdom. So in short, before I give you the iceberg of your being here tonight, what does it mean to be truly African?
Well, to be African is the simplest of things. First of all, we look differently. We are in a geographic space, and of course, there's a diaspora. But I think the challenge for us as Africans and to create the Africa we want, that is part of the theme of tonight's discussion, is to use the various instruments. We talk about arts, culture, and heritage, and that should be at the service of, if you want, the African Revolution. The fundamental issue is, you know, what are the challenges of Africa? Because you cannot talk about Pan-Africanism in isolation from the challenges facing Africa today. If you go back, way back to the beginning of the movement, whether you are talking about the London Conference, whether you are talking about the formation of the Organization of African Unity, first of all, there is, of course, a question of self-definition, who we are as Africans, but there is also the agenda, whether it's for political liberation, for social and economic transformation. So, and the question is, how would culture, art, and this self-awareness contribute towards those challenges? Because to talk about, yes, we can talk about who we are, but we define ourselves in relation to the challenges facing us today. For example, there was a time when the greatest challenge facing Africans was, for example, the one of racism, formal racism. The teaching that Africans and people of color are inferior, and the Black Power movement responding to that, which is also an aspect of Pan-Africanism, if you want. And therefore, at the end of the day, we have to come down to the question of, you see, what is the agenda facing us as Africans today? And of course, arts, culture as instruments for contributing towards that agenda.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Doctor, for your engagement. Young friends, comrades, this is the 4th episode of the Sopo Party Youth League public engagement, where we gather to share ideas, to share radical views, to share peaceful views about our motherland, and especially to our aim is to motivate and boost the morale of fellow Sopo Party Youth League members. As we celebrate Africa Day tomorrow, when we talk about Pan-Africanism, we are talking about mental, moral consciousness, which recognizes our Africanness. Dr. Kairem Bonde, how has the African Diplomatic Corps absorbed the idea of Pan-Africanism and the development of self-awareness as Africans?
Yes, I think the question of Pan-Africanism, it can be posed directly as a question of self-definition, but also Pan-Africanism can be articulated in action. And the Africa Group at the United Nations has been key in the support of the liberation struggle, in adopting key resolutions on the rights of people to self-determination, on culture and so forth. So while at that level you don't engage in the discourse in terms of self-definition, but you engage in the discourse in terms of collective action, because Pan-Africanism ultimately is a collective action in the promotion and the defense of African interests, be it at home or in multilateral fora and internationally. And I think Africans have been very successful in taking common position on critical issues affecting Africa.
Yes, thank you so much, Doctor. And that would bring me to the question, Comrade Sarah Lee. Would you agree with us tonight that Pan-Africanism must be subjected to constant critical re-evaluation and refurbishment as a young person?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. You know, growing up, like a lot of people always ask me, like, Sarah, why Pan-Africanism or why diplomacy, especially within the Pan-African context? And I always tell them that, you know, I joined Pan-Africanism, or I became a Pan-Africanist at a very early age, coming across the book of Thomas Sankara. And yes, of course, the Pan-Africanism of back in the days and the current Pan-Africanism are two different things. And hence, the 21st century Pan-Africanism comes with what? With the Renaissance. We cannot no longer talk about Pan-Africanism in the context of socialism, because the Pan-Africanism of Thomas Sankara, the Pan-Africanism of Kwame Nkrumah, Mzee Julius Nyerere, you know, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, the Pan-Africanism of Frantz Fanon, of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, of Kenneth Kaunda, of Sem Nujoma, of Samora Machel, of Steve Biko, of Chris Hani, you know, of Robert Sobukwe, the Pan-Africanism of that era and that generation can't resonate with the young people and with our current economic terms, because back in the days, Pan-Africanism equated socialism. The current Pan-Africanist system comes with a renaissance where we are saying, you know what, because we couldn't achieve the socialist Pan-Africanism of back in the day, because we couldn't achieve the Pan-Africanism of unity of purpose back in the day. We are now saying, with the Pan-African Renaissance, we are now saying that we want to realize an Africa of youth inclusion, an Africa of its renaissance. What does a renaissance mean? An Africa that is self-reliant. We can no longer talk about Agenda 2063's agendas where young people are, we weren't even part and parcels of those decision-making bodies. And leaders who will not, I'm sorry to say it, leaders who will even be there in 2063 are the ones that has made these decisions. So definitely I agree that it's a constant, change. It's a constant, evolution. It's a constant, interrogation to what Pan-Africanism would mean to an 18-year-old, to what Pan-Africanism would mean to a 16-year-old. So I absolutely agree that there's that constant, not criticism, but that constant question of how Pan-Africanism, you should remember that, Frantz Fanon said, each generation of relative obscurity, Mazua, must define its mission, which it must either fulfill or betray. So the current Pan-Africanism of the 21st century must most definitely fall under criticism. That's the only way we are able to grow. And that's the only way young people, especially in the form of arts and culture and heritage, are able to embrace Pan-Africanism. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Wow, that is the voice of a young person, and we do appreciate that strong voice, Comrade Sarah Lee. Doctor, behind me is the number of our WhatsApp platform where we receive questions from young people in Namibia. And one of the questions, they alluded to the gap that we have in your generation and our generation. How can we narrow that gap as young people, and how can our cultural heritage help us as a continent to develop a united Africa?
Yes, but let me just go back a little bit to what Sarah Lee said, the challenge of youth inclusion. We agree youth inclusion is important. But inclusion for what? And that is what the agenda that we have to define. Because inclusion to achieve a particular objective, and that objective would not be only, that objective will have to be a shared objective that is defined. And it's because it's a question of participation by all members of society, the youth in particular, that has been excluded for a variety of reasons. We can talk about the gender issue also, and in our past history, we can talk about the racial exclusion and what have you. There are different kinds of exclusions, but the inclusion of the youth, yes, but it has to be defined in the context of the objective that we share. And that's why,
agreed.
So that's one. I think the generational gap is a challenge, and it has always been there. We're talking about it as if it's new. Every youth league, whether it's ANC, Youth League of the Mandelas, we're dealing with people who are older and they were radical, they have different ideas than from the establishment and so forth. Whether it's my own youth league, we had ideas that we thought that were radical and different from the leadership, but we've ultimately found a common ground. And the common ground, of course, at the time was the liberation of our country and the participation of youth in that process, be it at the level of the armed struggle, at the level of diplomacy, at the level of different kind of engagement, academia, creation of knowledge, arts, culture, kawiwa, singing, and so I think ultimately it's everybody's has to come to the table, and we all come with different skills. That's why the concept of division of labor in society, we all can't do the same thing. We all have different gifts and so forth. But I think the challenge, for example, because then when we talk about the issue of unemployment, for example, in our country, and every year there is a new group that enter the labor market. And the statistics I had from a few years ago, it was like there are 20,000, more than 20,000 new entrants into the labor market. Yet the labor market is not creating the same amount of jobs. And therefore, that's why you have, therefore you're going to have youth unemployment as every year there are people turning 18. And this number cannot be absorbed immediately into the labor market. And therefore, we have to be creative in dealing with these issues. If they cannot be absorbed into the formal labor market, how can they be absorbed? What are the training and different society have tried to address that issues differently by making sure that they stay a little bit longer at the universities and what have you, and create other opportunities. But I think that is one. The other issue is for example, when you look at let's say look at a company, and I've done quite a bit of research dealing with this intergenerational issue in the way which is being articulated. And the interesting is that invention in certain sectors today are led by the young people. And they are the ones, especially when you come to IT. Who are the leaders in IT and so forth? It's usually the young people. But invention in other sectors, it requires a lot of many years of research. And those inventions are made by people who are in their 70s moving towards the 80s, especially in medicine, some of the breakthrough in medicine. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule and so forth. And that is where we have to appreciate the value of each generation at every historical conjuncture. At every single moment, there is an important role for the young people. There is an important role for the elderly people and for everyone in society. And I think to contrast them and try to see them as, well, if you want, enemies or whatever, or competitors, I think that is missing the point. And you have experience and you have energy and enthusiasm. And if you combine the two, I think you go a long way in addressing some of the challenges facing us as a society.
Agree with you. And I thank you for re-establishing the fact that as young people, we are at the forefront and we are willing to forge ahead and achieve economic emancipation. Comrade Sarah Lee, I want you to answer the question. Africa is one and we must unify her. How do we as young people propel ourselves to unify a continent that is growing at an unequal rate? He's unmuted.
I'm so sorry. I keep muting myself after every conversation. If comrade moderator, we are talking in Africanism or Africa in the context of culture, of heritage and of arts, right? And how do we propel ourselves in that? I want to focus on the theme, because if we have to discuss youth inclusion, for example, it will be such a very broad topic, because a lot of things fall part of that element. So when we talk about propelling ourselves in Pan-Africanism, or propelling ourselves in the times and days where there's a huge generational gap, is what do we look at as Africans when we see ourselves? Do we identify with a particular identity of Africanism? The world has become so modernized. And when I say modernized, in the context of Eurocentrism, We no longer take pride in wearing our traditional attires and our traditional, garments, or our traditional, shades, or our traditional, hat pieces, or our traditional shoes, or anything that is traditional. Comment moderator, I truly, truly believe that we cannot have this discussion without understanding regional integration. As Africa, we are so divided. Moderator, I've lived in North Africa. I've lived in East Africa. I've lived in West Africa. I've lived in Southern Africa. The only region in Africa that I've not lived in is Central Africa. So when I speak of Africanism, my views are so broad because I've lived in all these different parts of Africa. For example, if you look at the new age form of abuse on black to black, which the West came up with a very good name called xenophobia or xenophobic, you realize that Africans still have that thing of being black, something is wrong with you. Being white, something is good with you. In order for us as young people to propel this nation, we need to integrate regionally first. Africa can't even talk about exporting to the EU or exporting to wherever if we do not trade amongst each other. The Congo has water, for example. If there's a lack of water in Namibia has a lot of salt, for example. Why can't the Congo, the DRC, and Namibia trade between water and salt? Namibia has uranium. Before we can ship uranium to the Russians and to the Chinese, who in Africa might need uranium for electricity, for example? So we need, neighboring states to enter into an agreement in order to upgrade what? Cooperation through common institutions and rules, with the main objective of what? Socio-economic development of countries. Yes.
You have just made my heart palpitate, but I want doctor to just come in there for a second and just say something on what you have just said.
You have any specific question or just a general comment?
I don't. Just
yes.
a general comment.
I think we are dealing with different levels. Yes, we are dealing with different levels because, first of all, the question of self-definition is critical. We define ourselves as Africans. We have common objectives. We pursue common causes and we work together in pursuit of those causes. But when you talk about Africa as one, and in fact, the surprising thing is that there is greater awareness of being African among Africans than other continents. Europeans hardly refer themselves to themselves as I'm a European. They will be German, they will be this, unless they're talking about it in the context of the European Union and so forth. But Africa, we always refer to ourselves. There is that greater awareness. And this awareness, of course, was created because of the many years of oppression of the African people and the Black people. Therefore, we are very much aware of who we are because of, and the self-definition because of others. Now, the question is the cause of the African people, which is essentially, first of all, is can we achieve peace? We still have intra-African conflicts, and the conflict now in Africa is not so much between countries, but is within countries. And when you talk about one Africa, and we can unite, either be it in the DRC or any other country for that matter, these are the challenges. Because we talk about regional integration, we talk about continental integration without national integration. And the national integration is where it starts. It's the first step towards greater regional continental integration. And of course, through the institutions we created, we are able to act collectively internationally. We are able to make progress in terms of our regional cooperation in many areas. But we still have a lot of challenges in terms of national integration in a number of African countries. And that's an issue that we have not really been dealing with systematically. And it's only when conflict erupts between, groups within the country that we then would send, we start with mediation, we send peacekeeping mission, but we don't deal with prevention and preventative efforts. Preventative diplomacy is important to avoid conflicts, but conflict is definitely one thing that is setting the continent behind. The other one, of course, is the mode of integration into the world economy. As Sarah Lee started to say, the current Pan-Africanism is not about socialism, but it's a relation, how have you been integrated into the global economic system? And socialism, at least its African version, was to try and improve our insertion into the global economic system through various strategies, whether there was a time we're calling for disengagement from the system, efforts such as self-reliance and import substitution and all this. And that's why when you say African Renaissance, we still have to give its political and economic content. What is the economic content of African Renaissance? And it doesn't have to be socialism, but we have to define, and there are certain principles. For example, we as SWAPO, we talk about solidarity, and solidarity means assuming social responsibility towards the have-nots and instituting mechanism to redistribute resources within the country. We talk about freedom, which is, of course, same as democracy and issues of justice. These are fundamental issues. And if the Pan-Africanism of today, of the 21st century, does not address this issue, then it will not have meaning to the lives of the people on the ground. Because our people life is not about philosophy. Life is not about ideology, but it's bread and butter. It's better education for our children, it's better health. And if we cannot address better health, better education, and put bread on the table, then our Pan-Africanism, if it does not address that, then the African Renaissance, if it does not address that, then it will be irrelevant.
Comrade Sarah Lee.
Yes, so I do understand what Ambassador is alluding to, but Comrade Moderator, I hope you can just quickly accord me some few extra minutes so I can just bring my point across. Let's take a look at arts and culture, Comrade Moderator. This is a raw diamond in most of our African countries that has not been tapped. Arts and culture in Africa is literally an untapped market, because Africa needs to ensure that these are part and parcel of the products that we sell to the rest of the world, and not only as entertainment platforms, but as a getaway to do what? To doing business with Africa. You understand? We can literally, change how we look at arts and culture at continental level. We shouldn't only limit arts and culture to the tourism sector. And don't even make me mention the tourism sector, because I personally am aware of Europeans using African company or African names, companies with African names, and they're making millions of money every year on tourism alone. And that is why a normal African can't even travel Africa, because the prices are what? They are exuberant, like the prices are off the charts. So if we, at the first chance that we get, can also, ensure that our arts and culture is not only You know, you don't only limit that to Yunnan cultural festivals or Damara cultural festival or Olufuko. You make it a nationwide event or a continental event where you invite other African countries to come and showcase their culture as well. What do? In that way, you do what? You also add to the GDP of the country. That's the point that I wanted to make across, because when we look at arts and culture at a continental level, we leave it to entertainment. What do I mean by entertainment? We leave it to either you being an actor or you being a singer or a rapper. That is it when we talk about arts and culture. And it shouldn't be like that. In the African culture, we should document our traditions. We should document our heritage to say that, Comrade Moderator, when a woman is pregnant, for example, this is how the processes are. You know, we never used to have baby showers in the past, for example. We never used to have baby what and baby what before. But today we have modernized culture to a point that when somebody invites you to a baby shower and you don't attend, it's personal. Why can't we as Africans go back to the olden days where when a woman is pregnant, we in the olden days used to gather and say, how can we add value to the life of this unborn child? They would start knitting clothes, or they would put together resources so that when that child is born, the village make sure that they develop that child. That's the other point. The other point that I wanted to bring across is to say that Pan-Africanism has become vast because of the different interpretations they are. If you look at the current economic system that we are in, Comrade Moderator, we are no longer even operating at mixed economy. This is passive capitalism. If you look at the normal consumer income rate of any other person on the continent, it doesn't match the needs in life. So like Ambassador said, we need to bring Pan-Africanism to bread and butter issues, where we as young leaders, or we as leaders, or the current leaders get together and say, how can we actually, in real life, better the lives of our people? Because, Comrade Moderator, what we don't understand is we are facing the blank quest view. The blank quest view is basically a people that will initially force their way to the table. And when that happens, Comrade Moderator, we will not be able to control the masses. And so going back also to what Comrade Ambassador said on peace and security, we truly, truly need to support the call for peace and stability to be a goal at NYC level, at youth organization level, at political level, at youth political level. Because a continent or a country that is conflicted or that is in conflict doesn't add value in any way. What value are you going to contribute as a country or you as a person?
Comrade Sarali, thank you so much. And I love, or I appreciate the fact that both Doctor and yourself are merging economics and culture. So my question to Doctor would be, economies are now largely influenced by technological advancement. Is culture really a factor which can contribute to the economic growth, seeing the latest developments in advancements of technology?
Yes, let me, before I come to that question, I think the question of African culture, it's not a question of going back, it's a question of going forward and reinvent, renaissance. And therefore, when you say, let's go back to this and let's go back to that, we can't go back to the Stone Age and its practices. We can't go back to, but it's a debate for another day. But the question is, yes, but to come back then to the question of the role of arts and culture and economics. It's interesting, you know, I sitting in these meetings with the European Union and asking for money to promote our arts and culture and so forth. And I say, we are asking for money to promote our culture, other people are making their money through culture. And culture is an industry, and it's a rich industry where millions are made. Whether you're talking about, we talk about, Sarili mentioned the actors, we talk about the music industry. Our musicians are not protected. Intellectual property rights of our people are not protected. Popular musicians die poor in our country, who sells millions of albums, but they still die poor because we don't have systems to protect our cultural artifacts, to protect our music, to protect our art. You know, you see this picture of painting of John Mafungayo everywhere. You know, who benefit from that, from this exhibition, from this sale and so forth? I think that's one. But the most important thing is, you know, if you are going to engage in the global system, you have to, that self-definition is important. You know, you have to know who you are. And through knowing who you are, that is how you're going to engage. And who you are involve culture, involve principles, involve value system in essence. And you should be able, based on that should be your launching pad. You should stand on that foundation of Pan-Africanism, the foundation of being a Namibian, and engage with the rest of the world. Because ultimately, as Amilcar Cabral said, education, it's about going out in the world, learning the ways of the world, and apply that knowledge to transform your society. Now, if you come back and transform your society, then obviously you have achieved something. But if you don't come back with your knowledge, then you are lost. And I think the challenge then is, as we acquire these skills and technology, and then also become the question of appropriate education. And appropriate education have many nuances. One is like going back, you know, that I will be a better farmer than my grandfather was, and, you know, because I have to be trained to do that. And therefore, I will not be a diplomat. But appropriate education is also for us to be able to engage the world and to be equal to the rest of them. I think we are doing ourselves a great disfavor as Africans. We have sat in these European universities. We have learned their ways. We can speak their languages. And yet we have our languages. So we always have something extra. And not only did we sit in their classes, we also taught in their classes. And so there is something unique about ourselves, but at the end of the day, we have not still been able to transform our reality. And that's a question we should ask ourselves. If you look at Asian countries, yes.
In realizing our true identity as Africans, I think education is the ultimate equalizer. If a young person would ask you today, what book would I read? What would you advise them? Which book to
read? Yeah, could you come back? I think I missed your point there. I couldn't hear you properly.
If a young person asks you which book to read, how would you advise them what to read?
Oh dear. You know, I think that there is no one single book, but I found the writing of, I would say, two African leaders and writers have inspired me. And one is Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral, well, they are scattered everywhere, but they are very incisive. Of course, I've read Nyerere, and I have special relations to Tanzania, having lived there and having studied there. and having had the opportunity also in my previous incarnation to meet Nyerere on several occasions. I think that is one. But also, if we go to Europe, I would say, since we are talking about arts and culture and economics, Antonia Gramsci, for me, is one of those authors, and especially the connection between culture and political engagement. I think Antonia Gramsci is one of those. Again, his several books, and I wouldn't say just one book, but familiarizing yourself with the thinking of Antonio Gramsci, I would highly recommend that.
Thank you so much, Comrade Ambassador, for pouring from your fountain of wisdom. Comrade Sarah Lee, young people see Africa Day that we celebrate tomorrow as just another public holiday to watch a series or go shopping. In your view, how should young people celebrate this day in an impactful way?
Thank you so much for the question. You know, I think as young Africans, if we really want to do justice to this day, is to equip ourselves with enough knowledge on Africanism. Comrade Moderator, this would be an opportunity for us young people to document from the likes of Ambassador, for example. Ambassador carries a lot within him. And before the older generation goes to sleep, we must have tapped from them, knowing that what we have is not flawed history, what we are carrying is not flawed or altered information. What we are carrying with us is information that's going to last us until the next generation taps from us. We need to make documentaries of our elderly generation. We have got to document our history ourselves. That's the one thing. The second thing is, as young Africans, we should take time to understand African literature. You cannot know, and I'm going to get a bit controversial. You cannot tell me that you know everything about Queen Elizabeth, but you are clueless on who Kairam Bwenda is. You are clueless on who Thomas Sankara is. You have no idea who Robert Sobukwe is. You are clueless on Nathaniel Makhulili. You have no idea who Frantz Fanon is. When we talk about Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, all you have is what the West has told you who Muammar is. But on your own personal capacity as a young African, you haven't made time to study who our current leaders are, what they meant, what they currently mean to this generation, and what they will mean when they are asleep. And the third thing that I want us as young Africans to do, can we do away with cliques, please? This thing of, belonging to a particular group or belonging to a particular fraction, those are the things that have led to the older people holding on to power. Because when they look back and they say that young people, we're crying that we want power, we want to go into strategic and decision-making bodies, we want to participate in critical positions. But when young people, when the older generation look back and say, we are looking at the very same people that can't even, unite for the future, how are we going to trust them with leadership? That's number 3. Number 4, as young people, Comrade Moderator, it is time to hold hands. It is time to hold hands. I'm not talking about cheap politics. I'm not talking about cheap unity. I'm talking about us truly coming together and say, you know what, Sarah D, I know that we've heard in the past, but for the sake of our country, for the sake of our continent, we need to unite. How can we help each other? So you are a lawyer or you are an economist. How can we come together and add value to our nations and add value to our continent? Comrade moderator, we cannot keep just being complainers as young people. We cannot keep blaming apartheid. We cannot keep blaming political parties. We cannot keep blaming racism. We cannot keep blaming capitalism or imperialists or white people or the Euro. That time has passed. How can we contribute in our current state as young African leaders to our countries? How can you add value? So Africa Day to me is not only a time to reflect, but is a time to strategize on how I can add value to my country and to my continent. And last but not least, we need to start supporting each other. When a young person, somebody regardless of what your background is, if there is something happening that can elevate young people, we have got to stop looking at our economic, bracket background, or we need to stop looking at which influences is what or who is connected to who, and start supporting one another from grassroots level. And also just the point of departure on this point is to strengthen our national youth councils in Africa. NYCs are the backbone in terms of youth development. They are the legitimate or the recognized backbones in Africa. So we need, as governments, as young people, we have got to strengthen these entities. We can't no longer sit back and complain and say the NYCs are irrelevant, that young people can't relate to these organizations if we as young people do not even want to volunteer. So Africa Day, reflect on what this day means to you. Reflect on the journey we've come thus far as Africa, but above all, reinvent your thinking, shift your minds, shift your way of understanding and thinking in order for us to do what? To lead as a collective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sarah Lee, for roaring like that. That is how a true African lioness speaks. Young friends, comrades, compatriots, we come to you live from the SWAPO Party headquarters. This is the 4th episode of the SWAPO Party Youth League public engagement. With me, we have Dr. Kaire Bonde, who is a former ambassador to the United Nations and the European Union. We also have with us Comrade Sarah Lee Elago, who is the president of the African Renaissance. We thank them for the thoughtfulness and being willing and able to share their views with us on this platform tonight. My name is Heino Apollos. We would also like to thank those that have watched online, especially on Facebook and YouTube. We appreciate your comments. One amazing comment that I think came after the views shared by Comrade Sarah Lee was that from Godfrey Buck, African countries need youthful ambassadors. I mean young ambassadors to sell the country in respect of culture and economics. With those few words, in 1 second, I would like to ask Comrade Ambassador and Sarah Lee to just share with us an inspirational message that would stay with young people and that would remind young people of tonight on how relevant is cultural preservation for our youth. 1 second.
Thank you again for the opportunity. Okay.
No, that's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
No, Comrade Ambassador, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. You have already started.
Okay, so I think my point of departure in terms of motivation is, moderator, I want young people to understand, I want young people to realize that we are the heir to Africa's leadership. There's no running away from this. This is it. Nobody's coming to save us. Nobody's coming to deliver us. Whatever challenges that we are experiencing, we are our own saviors. We are the heirs to this beautiful continent's leadership. That's one. The second thing is I want to share a quote from Thabo Mbeki that says that the epoch of transformation has changed us from subjects of history into masters of our own destiny. Like, I really love this quote so much. It resonates with me. Thabo Mbeki is telling us, you know what? This generation, you need to understand that you are no longer subjected to the past. You are no longer subjected to what happened previously. However, you have the responsibility, you have the obligation to ensure that whatever changes you seek, you come up with those changes, you implement these changes, you carry these changes, you drive these changes, you make sure that you leave a mark as young people on this continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Comrade Sarah Lee. Comrade Ambassador.
Yes, I think for me, it's really the question of African unity and common purpose. Whatever we want to achieve, whether it's youth inclusion, it's upliftment of the standard of living, we need to act collectively. No single sector of society can achieve its objectives without including everybody else. But of course, it can champion it. Youth have to be the champion of youth inclusion, but they have to know that to achieve that inclusion, you need everyone to work together. Our own struggle have taught us. The elderly person who can hardly walk would be sitting there and cursing the system. The school children would lift a fist and say Amandla or whatever. And then the diplomats, the controversies, the plan, there was this collective action that brought us where we are. And if we can get the same kind of enthusiasm that we have, people went to great lengths to sacrifice for the independence of our country. Now, I don't see the same energy and enthusiasm to sacrifice for the economic advancement, to sacrifice for the youth inclusion. And this is therefore, and President Nkrumah always says that where a group of people united for a common cause will always triumph. And that is that unity of purpose and action that we need in dealing with the challenges facing us as a society. There is no sector of society that can do it on their own, but they have to provide the leadership.
Thank you so much, Comrade and Ambassador. Thank you so much, Comrade Sarah Lee. We appreciate you, and we thank you for being willing and able to join with us. We bring our blessings from the Office of the Secretary, who is Comrade Ephraim Nkongo, the entire National Executive Committee, the Central Committee, and all the SWAPO Party Youth League members from all corners, from the west to the south, the east to the center. Thank you very much. Until next time. My name is Heinel Apollos.